So let's begin. This class is approximately 16 weeks. It's a very structured, hands-on survey of topics. It will take people who are complete newbies and turn them into pretty skilled ninjas if you try hard and get a decent grade. I am willing to let people take it pass-fail. We are currently under the amount of seats that I want for the class. We have 12 open slots. We want it to be as filled as possible, so if you can advertise, that'd be great. Some people, this is a very difficult class compared to others, so they may not be willing to take it if they have to compete all the way for an A, but pass-fail may be more appealing to them. So, that last bullet point, final project. There is no final project. Let's forget that. So, here's basically the schedule. A better schedule is found on the syllabus calendar link. You should all have a paper copy in front of you. But we go hands-on into offensive topics like reverse engineering applications, perhaps closed source applications you don't have the source to find out what they're actually doing, which also has uses for malware reverse engineering, fuzzing and the art of finding vulnerabilities, and then developing exploits for vulnerabilities. And we'll go through skills ranging from writing shellcode to ROP exploitation to JIT exploitation. And the material has been much refined since last time. We're going to cover basic network hacking and then a number of weeks on web application hacking. Web applications are basically where all the action's at for the most part. That's where most of the bad guys get into companies. And we're going to cover advanced exploitation near the end and penetration testing topics like Metasploit and incident response topics like using volatility and doing forensics are at the end as well. What I like to do is I like to teach people how to do all the hard math, and then at the end I like showing them how to use the calculator. So that's what you should expect from this class. What's different from last time and this time is I've added another midterm before the drop day, so you have a better idea of how you're doing to be fair to students. And I've also taken out the term project and taken 5 lectures that freed up and added it in the beginning to give a more gradual introduction to all the topics to make it easier overall. There are also a few new homeworks, but in all you have 3 exams. The final exam is a take-home and about 9, maybe 10 homeworks. You may have more than one homework at a time. In fact, that will probably be common. But what I've done is taken the homeworks and made them shorter. So you may have 2 homeworks at the same time, but between the 2, you may have 10 problems total. I just go over topics very fast, and the best way to learn how to do them is to make you do them. And so that's my teaching style. So yeah, this was previously called offensive security. Some people who had a trademark on the term offensive security threatened to sue us. We didn't really want to comply. We just wanted to give this class a unique identity, so we named it Offensive Computer Security. We also have a new class that Joshua is teaching, Offensive Network Security, that teaches the more network in-depth set of topics related to this, and it's going to be very exciting. I myself, Owen Redwood, I'm going to be your primary instructor. I have some fun specialties. Don't call me professor, but Professor Liu, he's the man who has graced us with the permission to do this all. That's me. I have a pretty awesome mohawk when I wear it up. That's actually from the DEF CON documentary. I'm in it twice. If you find the second time, you'll have a pretty good laugh. Yeah, my dissertation research is on critical infrastructure security, and it's a lot of fun. It's a very difficult problem. I like difficult problems. Some of the good stuff I did is I founded the CTF team here, and that has now become the Cybersecurity Club. And this guy there, can't name him, is a big part of that, and you should definitely check it out. Let's see, 2012, I had an internship at Sandia National Labs. One of my projects was voting machine hacking, and they pulled me aside to brief Obama's chief science advisor on the work we did there, and I had to brief him for 15 minutes. They taught me to wear my mohawk down. Usually, nowadays, I'm pretty good, and they make me wear my mohawk up. They tell me to come to work. There's big people coming today. Make sure you wear it up. I'm like, sweet. And then, yeah, I taught this class last time. And my opinions are of my own and not of any of my employers or my alien overlord masters. Um, and that's the website for that URL got mangled for the class. I'll email all of this out on Blackboard, the URL for the class. And you can save a lot of trees by not printing out all the lecture slides because, again, I'll be videotaping everything. And it also makes it so you don't have to take as much notes. So here's the grading breakdown. 55% of your grade is going to be homeworks. 30% is going to be midterm 1 and 2. And 15% is going to be the final. The grading policy is individual work only on every homework, assignment, everything. Do not share answers. You can talk about techniques and approaches, but don't share answers. Now, that's a fine line. Obviously, walk on the good side of it, please. So in all homeworks, I try to grade you based off your ability to utilize the required skills and to communicate what you did, what happened, etc. Communication is extremely important in security. If you can only say your shit sucks, it's not as good as saying you have a critical vulnerability in this form that allows people to inject arbitrary commands into the SQL database and allows them to expose personal information. That's way better than the prior statement. So most homeworks will not require access to the SAIT Lab. And forewarning, I do curse sometimes. I'm sorry. It's very common in security. If anyone has a problem with it, please let me know. I'll turn it down. I'm going to try and tune it down. And projects, disregard that. I forgot to take that out from last time. Most of the homeworks will be can be done at home in a virtual machine. And I'll be putting together a video on how to set up your own virtual machine and own environment and putting that on the website so you can follow it if you have any trouble with that. Midterm 1 is tentatively February 10th. Midterm 2 is tentatively April 2nd. They shouldn't change. Midterm 1 is approximately week 6, so 5 weeks from now. So extra credit will be granted for any participation in CTFs, and definitely see the Cybersecurity Club to get involved. To see a schedule of CTFs, just go to ctftime.org, and you can collaborate on CTF problems, and I'll distribute the extra credit that I deem it's worth among the collaborators. I'm pretty fair about that. So this class is basically about 2 things, security assessment and risk assessment. Risk is defined as some function based on the likelihood of some hacker group exercising a potential vulnerability or exploiting a potential vulnerability and the resulting impact of that action, all right? It's basically a function of your potential threats and your attack surface, all the ways they can attack you. This is probably the best diagram I've found for this thing that we tend to call security. All of his neighbors got wiped out, and I'm sure he looked crazy up until that point. And security is really only appreciated when the threats are visible and are stopped. In the real world, security employees get a lot of bad press. You only hear about things getting hacked. You never hear about, oh, they stopped Anonymous, or they stopped this group or that group, or this Chinese group, Indian group, Russian group, or crazy, activist US group. So it only generates negative press for companies. It often, because of that, incentivizes security employees who are in charge of development groups or signing off on projects, and a company often incentivizes them to block development if it's expanding that attack surface they're trying to control too wildly or in a way they don't understand. And they are, what I think they should be more involved in the testing and the bug finding. It should be evaluated on the bugs found, because that is a metric you can use to measure how they are actively protecting your organization. And most companies don't do that. And to illustrate how often people are getting attacked, this is a real-time map put together by Arbor Networks, I believe, of botnet activities, tracking over 1,200 botnets around the world. The big dots right here are showing a botnet putting down 113 gigabits per second down on target, and it's been going on for 17 days. If you watch this graph for a long enough time, you'll find that US is the target of most of the attacks. But sometimes it varies. France is a big target right now, and it's a pretty good indicator of how interesting the quote-unquote cyber war can be. At the bottom of this, there's snippets of the most interesting activity and phenomenons that they've recorded, and it's worth looking at. In fact, it will be on homework 1. So you can do that in your own time. But that is just distributed denial of service. People use exploitation techniques to build botnets so they can achieve this. Taking down targets with simple crashes and simple denial of service exploits won't ever be tracked in a graph like this. Can't ever be visualized because that's a one-off attack. It doesn't take thousands of machines putting traffic down on a target. It takes someone on a phone sending a malicious series of packets to the target. It's very small, very hard to observe. It's a needle in a haystack event. And we're going to thoroughly explore the art of exploitation, the art of gaining unauthorized access, so we can understand it and prevent it. So this class is for seniors and grads who want to become the following, and we'll mainly focus on penetration testing and incident response. If you haven't taken a security class before, like ever, you might do pretty poorly. Also, if you're super lazy, you probably won't do well either. I don't care if you don't do your assigned reading for the other classes. In this class, I have chosen really good reading material, and it's going to help you out a lot. And sometimes it will end up on the test, even when we don't cover it in class. And it does help you on the homeworks. There are 2 textbooks. First one is The Hacking, the Art of Exploitation. You can pass it around. And the second one is the Web Application Hacker's Handbook. I replaced the previous textbook, Counter Hack Reloaded, with this. We'll use it for the second half of the class. I don't have it with me right now. But I'll email out. If you have any problems finding this or any questions, just email me. So the first book comes with a live CD that is really good for setting up a VM to do most of the exercises and homework with. And I'll cover that more in a video how-to. I used a lot of textbooks to create this class. This is a very incomplete list. It's probably 5 or 6 more that I didn't feel like putting on the slides. So the motivations for covering offensive security material is that I feel teaching only defense is like teaching people how to play soccer and how to play goalie in soccer when they don't even know what the goal looks like. I've talked to scores of system administrators and they just can't think the way people who do offense do. They don't want to spend the time understanding how things get attacked because there's so many other things that they could be doing with their time creatively to help people, to automate things, this and that. And penetration testing is really the field. It's a well-established field. I think there's hundreds of millions of dollars in it right now. And it is the field of assessing the correct implementation of security controls and policies, and is often legally required for compliance with regulations. Most security courses also focus very heavily on cryptography, which is important. It's very important. However, a really good quote that explains my opinion is that one of the most dangerous aspects of cryptology is that you can almost measure it. Cryptographic algorithms really rise to the top by standing the test of time. And that's it. You can find all sorts of different cryptographic algorithms that have fallen into obscurity, and there's no real way to measure how secure some are against others. But that requires very advanced knowledge of cryptanalysis, and you don't need that to break into most systems. In fact, you don't need to deal with a lot of crypto to break into most systems. So the other motivations for this class is that pen testing is fun. People look at you like this, and you get paid to do it. The other motivation is incident response is very important. There are not enough of them. Websites are always going down. This is all stuff generated from last year. I haven't even captured 2013. So this is all from 2012. Things are always getting hacked. companies are losing lots of money, and then they're liable to pay for like identity protection services for the customers, and they cost even more money, and it makes them look really bad, and then they lose investors. And being able to do this requires a lot of knowledge of the offense, and pen testing is more the proactive side, and incident response is more the reactive side. So pen testing sounds a lot like hacking. You're getting paid to break stuff. Criminals, in a sense, get paid to break stuff by the money that they steal. So what's really the difference? The difference is one word: permission. If you have permission to do it, usually under some sort of contract that you negotiated with the client, you can hack things, right? If you don't have permission to do it, it's that simple. It's illegal. And current cybercrime laws are pretty outrageous. You can find all sorts of cases where people committed very small crimes and had probably no victims to them. And in some cases, they're punished worse than someone breaking into a facility, stealing nuclear secrets, and selling them to places like North Korea. In many cases, it's worse than rape and probably beating someone, to near death. It's just not worth it if you want a career in this field to go and touch stuff that you don't have permission to touch. So let's talk about vulnerabilities. This is graphs all taken from 2012 or earlier. I haven't updated these slides largely, and they do the trick well enough. Vulnerabilities are, in general, on the rise. We have what's increasingly becoming the Internet of Things. First it was desktops, then it's laptops, now it's iPhones, tablets, etc. And so mobile operating system vulnerabilities are somewhat on the rise. Operating system exploits, the subset of vulnerabilities that actually get exploited, are on the rise. And some of those are balled into jailbreaks. Critical infrastructure is very much on the rise, and that's my research area. It's scary stuff. And total vulnerabilities in general being disclosed is generally on the rise as well, although you might argue it's tapering off just by that graph. So let's talk about the debate of ethics and vulnerability disclosure, and say you are using your favorite service and you find a problem, a bug, a vulnerability. What do? Who do you tell if you want to tell someone, and how? How might they react? Would they ask, why are you looking at that? Why are you poking around at that? You're not authorized to look at that page. Would they sue you, or would they react favorably, patch it, and say thanks? You saved us from a potential liability problem. Or would they just ignore your email, put a ticket in, just close it in a month and never get back to it? What if you worked really hard to find it? What if you spent weeks doing it? Should there be some sort of monetary reward for your time? So let's discuss how we got here, because it is a little silly. So early on, this was before my time, first off, there were security mailing lists where people who were interested in this thing called security had closed emailing lists where they discussed potential vulnerabilities and ways attackers or unauthorized people could get into their systems and cause their companies all sorts of problems. And the problem for them is that the vendors don't care that much and don't see this thing as security as something they should be spending their hard-earned dollars and limited resources on solving. And so what these mailing lists, these communities, these small communities that were outside the vendors did, is they took these applications, discussed the vulnerabilities, and discussed the ways to properly configure them, or perhaps the ways to patch them themselves. Then FRAC came along around 1985, and that was definitely more underground and attacker-focused, and frequently publishing articles discussing latest exploitation techniques and crazy vulnerabilities and ways to get root in systems that can cause problems. And back then, 99% of the people didn't know about security. And the perception back then is people doing research in this area were bad. They were bad people. Why are you looking at this? No good can come of this, right? If we don't have anyone looking for ways problems can be caused, no problems should be caused, right? Wrong. So the private communities got broken pretty early on by people getting on the mailing list. That's all it took to get in on all the intel of all the vulnerabilities that are out there and the ways people are fixing them. And then they just leak the emails and the tidbits to their communities, and basically everything the good guys are sharing is being shared by the bad guys. Because all it takes to break that system is getting on the emailing list. And the more swarm is when people woke up, and more closed emailing lists came about, and those got broken too. Really, the main problem still was vendors would not acknowledge security problems, and everything was buy at your own risk. And this frustrated people who were in those good communities that wanted to fix these things. And telling vendors day after day that you have a problem and not getting fixed frustrated a lot of people, and people figured, well, maybe the only way to get this changed is just to tell everyone, good and bad. Full disclosure is what came about. And 8-legged groove machine was one of the first examples, and the basic format remains still today. It's a text-based report. It describes the affected software and operating system, description of the impact of the vulnerability if it were to be exploited, what the attacker gains access to and what they can influence, and a potential fix and workaround info, and whether or not they've reported to the vendor and who else before this. It was extremely controversial at the time because it created a problem to solve a problem. The problem it created is now everyone knows this can be broken and how, but also they're telling people how to fix it potentially. So it created a race. You want to pay attention to this so you can perhaps fix it before it gets exploited in your system. And it really made the vendors look bad. So in a sense, many argue this was necessary at the time just due to how reluctant vendors were to solve any of these problems. And this is an example of a SunOS vulnerability. It described a problem with basically all programs calling this function called syslog. It takes a string and it enters into the system log. It basically suffered from either a format string exploit or a buffer overflow. I can't remember. And they have no known secure platforms. It affects all platforms, and blah blah blah. There's a good follow-up I found on this that this is an email chain that someone said they just called Sun support and they don't know anything about this and they don't accept the 8-legged groove machine advisory as a problem and cannot prove the bug exists on quote-unquote our Sun OS host. Yeah, that's pretty frustrating to find. If you see something with working, perhaps proof of concept exploit code, and you talk to the vendor about this, and they're like, yeah, those are not the droids you are looking for, kind of thing. But the follow-up perhaps is more interesting, that the person who replied to that complaint is basically explaining that this is actually an acknowledged problem. There is an open bug report and a tracking number. It's just the person you're talking to was perhaps confused or misinformed. And so I'd like to argue that this time was really shaped by misinformation, miscommunication, and people not knowing how to communicate security well. And we've gotten a lot better at communicating security problems and how to address client expectations and how to address what's expected of vendors as well. So back then, situational awareness was bad, and that caused all this miscommunication and confusion. And the first reaction many had was to get the lawyers involved and start suing people because you shouldn't be looking at these things, people thought. And still, vendors were very slow at patching things, and solutions were very slow to come about. And many times attackers could get an exploit out quicker than a vendor could get a patch out. And this problem still plagues small startups and small companies. Many small startups cannot afford security people or someone with security background to make sure that their product is not a buy at your own risk type of situation. And so the main problems with full disclosure is they created a problem to force vendors to act. There's a lack of clarity about vulnerability research and the general legal issues involved and whether or not these people should be sued or could be sued. And often the vendor's first reaction was to get the lawyers involved. The underground industry evolved and somewhat thrived around all this new information that's being told to everyone. And the bottom line is that a lot of researchers became famous from it. Look at me, I'm so elite. I hacked all the things, and this is how. And full disclosure also did not ostensibly result in a reduction of attacks, although that statement is extremely hard to measure. I'd say impossible to. So many believe that full disclosure is what enabled mass malware and the rise of worms, because people were just reusing these disclosed descriptions of vulnerabilities or this disclosed proof of concept exploit code. And so many of these things, I love you, code red, and et cetera, were actually things that were previously in full disclosure lists that someone just weaponized and used for their own purposes. And so what people realize is that perhaps this might be solving some problems, but we need a better way to do things, to handle disclosure, to fix problems. And so someone submitted to a committee a process for responsible disclosure. And it, in the end, puts the responsibility on the researchers and not the vendors to fix the problems. It basically said that the researchers will withhold disclosure, withhold gaining all the glory until the vendors patch it. What happens if the vendors just don't acknowledge it? Well, no problem is going to get solved. So some would argue that the use of responsible there is not appropriate, but that depends on the person. So eventually what came about is the current status of the industry, which is coordinated vulnerability disclosure, where vendors are more accepting of the benefits that vulnerability research has for them. There's a recent article out by California University that did a cost-benefit analysis on paying bug hunters and developers and testers versus having a bug bounty program. And we'll discuss bug bounties in a little bit. But they argued that 9 times out of 10, you get more bang for your buck by having bug bounties and not hiring these people, which is pretty sad. But those people who do coordinated vulnerability disclosure and bug bounties basically are advertising, we swear we won't sue you if you find something wrong with our stuff. And the vendors finally came about to accepting responsibility for the issues in their products, which is the way it should be. The responsibility should be on the vendors. They're the ones selling the product. They're the ones that should be responsible for the features and the undefined behavior of it. So what somehow came about again was also vendor-sec mailing lists, and these two were broken. All it takes to get in on that type of community is the right email invite, someone leaking it. Also what came about was delayed disclosure, is that you basically go to a company that may not be advertising, we swear we won't sue you, and you say, there's a vulnerability here, it affects this is the impact, these are the known vulnerable systems that I've found, these are the known secure ones that I've found, here's maybe a way to fix it, you have 2 months to do it, and then I'm going to disclose everything. That's generally the gist of delayed disclosure. And so this is what you find at many, many conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON, although it's also bug bounty stuff there too, where people want to gain all the glory from it. And they've arguably done the responsible thing, told the vendor it's only the vendor's fault if they didn't fix it, but they get even more fame if it's exploitable, right? And it hasn't been patched. You're enabling all these people to go own things, right? So they get arguably more glory if it hasn't been patched. But glory only gets you so much. It won't get you, 3 hogs and a cot. Or sometimes it will. So bug bounties are also what are out today. And basically, people are realizing that vulnerability research is a very valuable service, and it should be rewarded. And the general reward scale is not based on the amount of time you took to find it or your skill. There's generally just flat bounties, and they scale. And the severity and the worth of the bug you found is determined by the vendor themselves. They're usually pretty sensible about it across the board. And so this is an old table from last year that I put together. Sometimes you can get thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars for finding bugs in systems. And most of them are pretty good about it. There's a big list here. But the timeline really is that we had no disclosure and security was just like a magical thing. And then private communities and mailing lists and that was broken by people getting in on them, and then we had full disclosure because the vendors weren't solving anything, but that just created also more problems. So that spawned responsible disclosure and the efforts we have now today for bug bounties. And so, as it stands today, vendors are pretty good at patching things across the board. There are still bad apples, but this report that I'm citing, the companies that they surveyed measured that 58% of all the companies patched the same day that bugs were disclosed and found to them, which is pretty impressive. And this tracks some bad guy trends, that things that are inexpensive to exploit and have large opportunities for what they can do afterwards are really the most widespread used. But sophisticated attacks, things that are really hard to exploit but also have really high value, are also on the rise. But the commodity or community, occasional, casual exploitation of things is also on the rise as well. But these are things that don't have much rewards. Maybe just defacing a website or doing things for the lulz or trolling people. Things that are inexpensive to exploit, like, hey, anonymous people, download Loik or Hoik and just run it, and you'll be connected to our botnet, and you'll just be targeting what we choose. So back to this graph about the trends and vulnerability disclosed. You could argue that despite the progression towards bug bounties, we're only having more and more vulnerabilities being disclosed. So isn't that really just meaning things are getting worse? I'd argue no, because we still don't have a way to measure the total known vulnerabilities to use that as a baseline to normalize that number. All we have is that and nothing else. So all we can say is really situational awareness about the number of vulnerabilities out there is getting better. The real metric that would be ideal is the percentage of vulnerabilities left unfound. If that number is getting smaller at the end of the day, there's overall progress. So this is a rather hilarious YouTube video that I'm very convinced the guy is trolling. He has very poor English to the point where I think he's forcing it just to be funny. And it is from the July of last year intrusion of the Apple developers website that exposed a lot of personally identifiable information and made Apple look really bad. And it was pretty funny, but pretty silly. Let's get to the actual meat of the class. Now that we've covered the disclosure debate, and really a lot of hacking techniques and penetration techniques is a cyclical process. You don't have to get to the next step to restart the cycle. Often you get to one step and you end up seeing more information, you're doing more reconnaissance. So I'll go through each one. There we go. So prior to getting a permission slip for penetration test, you're going to have to establish and work out the following things. You're going to find out what type of penetration test the client's willing to get. Are they going to allow physical access to the site or the location, or just remote access? Is social engineering allowed, which is a very tricky problem, because often the results of doing social engineering get misinterpreted and people get fired for the wrong things. Is it going to be covert, or is it going to be overt, which manipulates the data set, is unscientific? If you tell your company, hey, I'm paying these people to hack us between this week and that week, all your security people are going to be drinking gallons of coffee and bringing their A game, unlike every other day of the year. And then you have to establish the rules of engagement. What is off limits? Are you allowed to target all your systems, or just the production systems, or only just the development systems that are somehow remotely accessible for whatever reason? Are you allowed to target bring your own devices, people's personal iPhones and Android phones? Are you allowed to target third-party systems, which I've never heard of being allowed? because that's up to the third party. What is the threat model they are expecting to have assessed? Are they expecting, super elite Chinese hackers funded by the state attacking them, or a group like Anonymous trying to bring them down for the lulz? Do they have any specified targets they want you to get at? Like certain banks often want to know, I want to know if you can get to these companies' accounts because they're like 90% of our money. And third, the timeline. How long should the engagement last? And most importantly, what to expect from the report, because if you deliver something the customer does not expect, that's always going to be a problem in any industry. So reconnaissance is really just intelligence gathering. You can find out a crazy amount of stuff about a company or a target with the internet. Search engines are great for finding websites, but there's also search engines for finding devices. So Shodan, started by John Matherly, I think in the first year that they launched it, what it does is it scans the internet for certain services, not just port 80 web server services, and stores the responses from those scans. The banner headers and the initial protocol responses, and it saves them. And what you do is you search the internet for devices based off certain strings you find in certain services you want to look for. You're basically searching based off device fingerprints. Within the first year, they found a particle accelerator, I think in California, just facing the internet, and they told the university, hey, I can control your particle accelerator from my couch. You should probably fix this. And so this has been used to fix a lot of problems in critical infrastructure where things are facing the internet and they shouldn't be. So if you happen to know certain devices in your target, you may be able to find them this way. And a good way to find what devices might be being used by a company is to search social media websites like LinkedIn or Monster or whatever. You search for people who have past jobs somewhere and you look at what devices they've used. Perhaps they're really familiar with Siemens SCADA devices, or they're really familiar with this, $50,000 Cisco router. That's a pretty good indicator that company is probably using that. And it's very hard to prevent that information from getting out because people want to be able to be hireable. And so you can also look at cached versions of websites. The Wayback Machine is a internet history amalgamator, which basically stores a snapshotted history of most websites on the internet, and it's fantastic for getting information. And I've used it to find out old things that people wanted to scrub off. You can look at public records, tax returns, and stuff like that, and you can use social media and Facebook. A lot of pen testers have talked about at conferences going to Facebook, typing in their target company, and finding all the web page, all the users' profiles that come up with that, just saving every single word on that, adding it to a dictionary, and using it for their brute force. Often people's passwords are going to be like their pets, and they're going to talk about how much they love their pets and stuff like that, or their kids, or their sports team. It's hilariously bad. And then the things I haven't read are usually the things you have to get special permission for. Social engineering, talking to the people there. That may be completely off limits. But if you can social engineer people all day long, from people in sales to people in IT to the PR people. And if you have permission to do physical engagement and visit in person and perhaps pick locks, there's way more you can do, and we'll cover that in the very last week. And all this is really intelligence gathering. Obviously, you make allusions to espionage and the spy craft. But really, everything I discussed is either open source intelligence gathering or human intelligence gathering. And human is usually off limits. Then once you've done some reconnaissance and identified perhaps the services they're using and different ways you might be able to get in, you scan those ways for potential vulnerabilities and enumerate other services you might not have found thus far. And then you can repeat, do more reconnaissance as you gain more information and repeat that cycle. But basically what you're trying to do is identify some form of attack surface. That's the most important word this lecture outside of permission. Permission is the most important word. The next important term is attack surface. All this, incident response and pen testing, is all about identifying and defining the attack surface and protecting it as best you can. So for a single system, it might be, if it's connected to the internet, all the ports that are open, all the user accounts and the strengths of the passwords, the file system permission model, the available programs that are being running are just available, and anything else you might think of that excludes physical access. And so we'll go into this more in later lectures. And then after you've discovered the attack surface, which dictates the potential attack vectors, you want to find which attack vectors actually have vulnerabilities. All right? So if it's a web server, perhaps it's WordPress or something unupdated, some unupdated Drupal, or they're using a common plugin, those may have vulnerabilities. Or if it's an old network service, or if default login credentials might work, you would be jaw-dropped to know how many manufacturer backdoors there are in critical infrastructure systems and in routers and devices like that, in what's generally considered embedded systems. It's just astounding. And at the end of that, at the end of identifying the attack surface, is the art of gaining access, the art of exploitation, and basically attackers have an asymmetric advantage. For a defender, you have to prevent all of the ways to be attacked from being attacked. You have to defend all the ways to get in, right? And it may be an unknown figure you have to defend. You may not know all the ways to get in. You may not know all the attack techniques. Attacker just has to find one that works. So attackers always have the advantage. And they can use any number of techniques and exhaustively try them all day. And so the most common ways I've found that attackers get in is really the first one is social engineering. If you ever go to DEF CON, try to visit the social engineering CTF. It is really humorous. They call up, really I'd call it victim companies, and they don't ask them for really sensitive stuff, but they have a checklist of what gets them points, like what version of Word are you running, what version of Internet Explorer you're running. And it's really funny seeing the participant try to social engineer this information out of them. Often girls act like a naive hot chick that just flirts the information out of them. Often guys act, I've seen like art students, and they're like, what is this thing called McAfee? Do you use it? What version do you use? What version is good? Those are the two most successful ones I've seen. I think not to be sexist or anything, but the empirical study that they did with their, empirical quote unquote, with their competition of men versus women is, I think the women won. And you can say with that what you will. But the next most common way to get in, so social engineering also is an impersonal thing, involving things like spear phishing, sending out mass emails to people, hoping someone downloads and runs your malicious JPEG.exe, right? It has a really cool picture of a cat in it. And basically preying on the weakest link. That's one of the most common targets, is the weakest link in your organization to get in. It's usually the dumbest person that's least computer savvy. Then the next most common way is to get in through your web application. And we'll cover this in the later half of the semester, but it's all binaries to me, and you'll see why. Another common way is pivoting from a third-party system that you perhaps trusted. And then if you have public-facing network applications, and then some funny ways I've seen are malicious USBs or gift gaming keyboards. Malicious USBs littered in the parking lot, a technique called baiting, is how Stuxnet worked and sabotaged an Iranian centrifuge. And I'm sure it's how other things have worked as well. There's a pen tester story where, who did it? He's famous. Kevin Mitnick and his guys were allowed to do whatever they wanted to a company. So they bought these gift gaming keyboards and modified them so that when you plug them in, it basically enables a backdoor on the system and dials back home. And they just mailed them to the system administrators. And what did they do? They plugged it in because it's a really sweet keyboard. And instantly own the keys to the kingdom. So beware Trojan horses when they're physical things too. Um, and then after you gain access, um, most of the art of exploitation is escalating the access, escalating your capabilities, and in essence what's called privilege escalation. Attackers, gaining access is just one step. Attackers want more in general. And so there's all different things you could do, password cracking, key logging to see other passwords, more social engineering once you've got access to, say, the low-level system administrator. I believe HB Gary was taken down by someone getting access to someone else's account and then emailing the system administrator asking for what's my password to root on this machine, and unfortunately it wasn't stored in a non-reversible hash into the system administrator. So like, sure, here it is, and the attackers own the kingdom. Then is usually in the cycle is attackers want to maintain access and basically the activity of post-exploitation. Now that you've hacked into a system, what do you want from it? Are you there to steal information, intellectual property, engage in piracy, theft, steal money, deface things, do all sorts of bad stuff? It's important in a pen test to assess your capabilities at this point, how far you've gotten into the system and what impact that might have if someone were so maliciously inclined got to this point as well. And so it's important to keep an open mind and be creative when describing these types of activities that might be possible. And so what you will learn in this class, and we might end a little early, is x86 reverse engineering. You'll learn secure C coding and code auditing. You'll learn exploit development from what people would consider the original to the most modern techniques, although I found papers that explain, well, date back to the 70s, they explain the most modern techniques in just different terminologies. So I really wonder how modern they are. And I'll share that with you. There's a paper by a committee of NSA people and MITRE and others. It was really interesting to read. We'll learn web application hacking, network hacking, so dive into social engineering, into post-exploitation techniques. And if we make it, we'll have a lock-picking workshop, and I'll have you guys pick locks because physical security is a very, very important part of cybersecurity. If you don't do background checks, but you have $20,000 IDS and a $15 lock on your server room, you really only have $15 of security on your server room because all I have to do is give you a fake resume, and if you don't background check me, I'm in your building and I can pick that lock and get physical access. And in security, if an attacker gets physical access, it is completely game over. That is the worst outcome you could have. So, but the most important thing is you're going to learn how to communicate these things. Because if you can just do these things and cannot communicate them, you're pretty worthless. You're not easy to hire, and it's hard to appreciate your work if you can't communicate it well. So there's three general models for threat models for explaining to a customer what they might want their threats centered around, or this is also used in software development lifecycle, such as the one at Microsoft and I believe the one at Google. One model is that attacker-centric. You start with the attacker and you evaluate their potential goals or what threats you might face, whether it's sabotage, defacing, or corporate espionage, stuff like that, and how they might achieve them. Or it might be software-centric. You start with the design and the architecture of the system. You attempt to step through like a model of it, looking for attacks against each component. Or you start from the assets in a trusted system, like the most important party's bank account, and you find all the ways to get to it from the basically the pot of gold. So it is very important to categorize threat and explain the capabilities posed by threats. And the number of threats is always increasing. And this is a pretty good diagram of the attacker lifecycle, but also is overlaid by three different categories of threat, which the most powerful is listed as Advanced Persistent Threat, also known as APT. It's a buzzword that started in 2012 of basically the leadest of lead hackers that are banded together, probably aren't working alone, and are potentially state-funded or mercenary groups, to hacktivists, which is probably best described as LulzSec, Anonymous, groups like that, to commodity threats, people who, well, can only really build and utilize the tools within their grasp, aren't able to network a group of people to pull off their attack, but are more able to test for intrusion detection systems and are generally as capable, but fewer in number as hacktivist groups. So it's important to keep in mind the threat model because risk at the end of the day is ultimately what you are assessing and is a function of the threat model that you face and your attack surface and vulnerabilities. So the goals of the bad guys, thus, to keep in mind are money, credit cards, financial data, personally identifiable information, perhaps of your enemies or political dissidents. Has been known for nation states to target political dissidents online, find them, and then sometimes round them up and kill them. You saw a number of instances of that happening in the Arab Spring. And it's happened in other countries as well. Passwords and password hashes usually are obtained in every hack. Sometimes the objective is total corporate sabotage, which happened in HB Gary. Potentially, it's your people that you're partnering with and not necessarily you. They may be using you to pivot into the people who trust you system and attack them. Or perhaps they're using you just for long-term backdoors in case you turn into a big startup and get bought out for a lot of money. Or they're just after your intellectual property, which is increasingly on the rise in APT attacks. Blah, blah. In the real world, they always have an advantage over pen testers. The best example of this is the $5 wrench solution. Bad guys really, you don't need to crack horribly complex crypto when you can buy a $5 wrench and beat the guy who designed it to near death till he tells you the secret how to break it or just the password. You can easily buy crime kits online. The Zeus, Trojan, Black Energy 2, that guy just got round up, which rises the number of people who have been successfully prosecuted in Russia for cybercrime to about 3. They can attack your partners, where in a pen test you don't have permission from the partner to attack them. They can usually bring your own devices, so utilize, perhaps target your spouse or your significant other's laptop and hope that you plug in your phone to charge on the laptop at some point, at which point it affects your phone, and then you bring it to work, and then they get inside the work network. They can use proxies, they can spoof IPs, they can spoof MAC addresses and be completely anonymous online. And they can break any number of laws because that's the business they're in. Unlike being a pen tester, you have to have permission for almost everything you do. So they have an asymmetric advantage. And this is ultimately why pen testing and incident response is so important. And I'm sure many of you have doubts saying, many of the things we'll learn about, like buffer overflows, have been around for 40 years. It's 2014 already. We just fix these things and keep everything patched up to date and not use unsafe code, use safer languages, have everyone use strong passwords and not be dumb. All of this is unlikely to ever be solved. I feel strong passwords are increasingly being argued to be dead. You're always going to have dumb users. Safe code is hard to do, even in safer languages. And keeping everything patched is sometimes not a solution or an option. So that's the end of the lecture, let's go to the class website. Go back. All right, so what you'll find on the class website is the link to the syllabus and calendar. You'll have a link to the assignments. Homework 1 is out. I'm in the habit of releasing things early because I get them done kind of early. And it's due, I forget, the 15th, which is next Wednesday, but I'll probably extend it to next Friday. It's pretty easy. It's a very basic homework. I expect everyone to get 100 on it. But on the lectures page, you'll find, when I do lectures, you'll find the lecture videos uploaded to YouTube and posted here. And there'll be an embedded link that you can click straight through. And they'll typically be 1080p quality. And what I'm going to have is many times I'll do demos in the videos. And I'll have just the demos uploaded individually as well. And I'll have how-tos uploaded as well like that. So it's more convenient. But what you'll find is for each video, you'll find the lecture slides and the required reading and the overview of that lecture. And like I said, I'll email the class out the details for the IRC channel that we'll be hosting the virtual class on. And if you have any questions, any complaints that need to be addressed by someone in person and I'm out of town, I've listed Professor Liu's office hours so you can address perhaps my horrible behavior and seek to remedy it if you so desire, although I try to behave, I do. And there is, I guess, an about section for this class if you're so interested in learning the history. We will have 3 guest lecturers. The first one is going to be a repeat guest lecturer from last time, Mitch Adair. I work with him. He's a great guy. He's awesome at reverse engineering, one of the best guys I know at it. And he's going to be teaching the last week, Monday and Wednesday of January, a hands-on workshop. And you'll all be expected to participate with a laptop. You can borrow someone's laptop if you don't have one. And all you need to have set up is a virtual machine with IDA Pro, the free version installed. I'll email out the instructions on how to get it all done, so you don't have to worry about that. And you have till the end of the month really to do it. So don't worry about it too much right now. But yeah, homework 1 is out. The second guest lecturer will be Devin Cook. He'll be from Sandia National Labs. I met him there. And he'll be teaching ROP and Advanced Return-Oriented Programming and Exploitation. And the last guest lecturer will be Jordan Weens. He's a pretty famous guy. He's going to be teaching jet exploitation. So we're very fortunate to have these people help teach this class. It shows that industry is very much interested in this class and helping potentially shape the coverage of these topics in academia because it does really, at the end of the day, a lot of good. So I have, at the end of the lecture slides, today's reading, which is really just part of the first chapter, which is labeled in hex. You guys will be very familiar with hex by the end of the semester. So that's just chapter 2, and only up through that section. So any questions? Yeah.
How are we, you said that we're not always going to meet in person. How are you going to discern if we're meeting in person on a particular day like this Thursday or next Tuesday?
I will email you guys all out on Blackboard very much ahead of time. I should have the whole schedule of when we're going to meet in person, definitely for the midterm 1 and 2, right? And I will try to meet in person for the midterm reviews before each one, so I can better address anyone's questions in person. But it should be relatively a few times, 3, 4 or so. But I'll try to have the whole schedule finalized and emailed to everyone so everyone knows by the end of this week. But it will just be today, Wednesday, and then not for the rest of January, so not next week, and then the end of January. That's the short-term schedule right now. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys.